Welcome to the Scottish Paranormal Podcast. I'm your host Chris, and here we'll be delving into the multitude of strange occurrences that happen within Scotland and beyond. You can contact us with your accounts at the Scottish Paranormal Podcast at gmail.com. You can find us on all social media channels, and you can contact us by either means. Tonight's episode we have Hazel Stuart back on the show. Hazel's an author and researcher of Robert Kirk. We had her on previously discussing all things Robert Kirk and digging into some of the folklore stories. Tonight we'll discuss some more stories and delve into a wee bit more deeper. Right, so tonight's episode we have Hazel Stuart on the show. Hazel was on previous, discussing all things Robert Kirk. Hazel's an author and researcher of Robert Kirk and currently no far off bringing out a book on Robert Kirk as well. Am I right in saying that?
Hopefully.
Getting there, yeah. So we delved into a good bit about Robert Kirk the last time, and tonight we're going to discuss a wee bit about some of the stories in regards to Premonitions. And I've also got a folklore story for you as well, which I've just picked up recently. I know I've been chatting back and forth with you about it. I've not told you about it yet, but I'll tell you a wee bit about the story. So how are you? How are you tonight, Hazel?
I'm great, and I'm looking forward to your story.
We can get right into it, and I'll tell you the story first. So it was funny because when we were organising the meeting again, I had somebody contact me. I get people contact me now and again with the stories here and there, and I get different people on the show. And the person who told me the story didn't want to be recorded in regards to putting it out there, but he said I could relay the story, just for the fact that didn't want to seem like a crazy person or anything like that. But that's where we are these days. We're still, for what he's seen, I could probably imagine why he feels this way as well, because it's quite a mad story. I mean, but these things happen. People see these things, and there must be a treasure trove of stories out there that people don't relate to anybody and keep it to themselves. And that's what I'm here for. That's what I'm trying to find out. You know what I mean? It's like I'm in this to try and find some more stories and try and dig out all the old stories for the family backgrounds and things like that. That's what I really want to try and get. It's not about fame or anything like that. I want these stories. So this happened in 2016. Happened in 2016, and he was driving between. It was on the A9. So the A9, to all the listeners out there, if you don't know the A9 motorway, the A9 motorway is a motorway that runs from the central belt of Scotland, and it drives all the way up to the north coast. And it starts off as a motorway, changes it to a dual carriageway, and you could basically have it for central Scotland all the way up to the north coast at Thurso. So anyway, he was on the A9, and the A9 situated between Stirling and Perth. So there's quite a devoid a lot of population in between that part. There are a few small towns and stuff like that. So he was there, and he's from roughly kind of within that area. I'm not going to tell you where he's from, but it's a good swathy area anyway. So he was on one of the side roads off the A9, and hopefully tell the story correctly. I'm going to go back and review it again, right? But he'd seen start off with he'd seen it was like a hawk or a sparrowhawk chasing something. And it was coming towards him. It was coming against the wind, and it was coming towards him. I couldn't make out what it was. It was coming towards him, and he was in a car. His wife was in the car next to him. She was sleeping, and this thing was coming towards him. And he said the way it looked like the shape of a maple leaf, but it was about a foot wide. Okay, about a foot wide, shape of a maple leaf, and it was coming straight towards him in the car. As he was driving along the road, they said there was another car coming on the other side of the road at the same time, and they actually slowed down as well because they think they had seen it as well. So what he'd seen is this thing came towards him. He said it looked like a big maple leaf. It was, if I can remember correctly, said it changed colour. Said it was like orange in colour first. Right, you would think a maple leaf's that colour, right? People would think that. A foot wide though, right? And he said when it got closer, it changed to that kind of pinky colour, and the centre of it was like a more white, creamy type colour as far as I can remember. So what he said he's seen though, he said a lot of people would probably just say, right, you've seen a bat, or you've seen this, or you've seen that. But he actually seen, he said within the centre of this thing, he said he could see it was like the shape of a man. And in the centre of this with wings, it was the shape of a man. And he said he could even see its face grimacing because it thought it was going to get hit by the car. And as it was coming closer, it changed colour. And it kind of pulled its wings or whatever. They said it didn't hit the car, but it kind of went over the wind. It kind of went over the windscreen as if like it'd been caught with the wind. But he said it was. He could see muscles in this thing. It was that close to his windshield in the car, and he could see its face. And he said he could see its face grimacing. And he said the way I could describe it is obviously the wing kind of span of it. It looked like a maple shape of a maple leaf, that kind of the points in it. So it looked like that. But then when it came closer, you could see that it had like a man in the centre of it, which is like kind of white in colour, a pinkish colour. And he said it looked like, he said if you've seen Guardians of the Galaxy, right, and the thing in Guardians of the Galaxy called Groot, it's like a thing, it looks like a tree type thing. He said it looked like that, apart from it was white and it had a kind of flat head. The way its head was quite flat. He goes, that's what it was. But he said that it had like a man's face and a man's body in the middle of this thing. And he said it's the strangest thing. He said that, I mean, it's the strangest thing I'd seen because I never even told my wife about it until well later on. And he hadn't told, as far as I can remember when I listened to his story, he never related it to anybody else. In fact, one other person that he's working related to. And that was it, because he didn't want to seem like he was mad or stuff like that. So that's what he's seen. But it said in the same area, they've seen other things as well. He said they'd seen, I think he's one of his friends had seen like orbs and stuff like that in the sky. This guy's like, I mean, it's no, I listened to his story, it seemed totally plausible. I mean, didn't seem he was making anything up or anything like that. No reason to lie about it. Did they want to be relayed? Or did they want it recorded or nothing like that? I said I could relay the story and that was it. And you come across stories like this quite a lot where people didn't want to put them out there just because they didn't want to sound absolutely bonkers. You know what I mean? But they happen. They do happen. I mean, so I just thought I'd kind of add that in at the start because it was just around about the same time as we were kind of messaging to set this up. But aye, so it's a strange one. I mean, I think when he researched into it, and the only thing he could chalk it up to in regards to folkloric things, it was a thing called a dryad. Which is I don't know. I've not looked too much into what a dryad is, but it's something folkloric, fairy kind of like or whatever. It was something like that. I mean, so quite an interesting story all the same, though.
It is an interesting story, isn't it? And isn't it interesting his reaction to not want to share that and to hide who what his identity was? And you would think that Robert Kirk might do the same, but he's right on the edge there. So I've got my own theories, which I think I've shared with you before, about why he might do that. But it's interesting that even today, you know, people see strange things, and rather than sort of say, "Oh, that was a funny story, that was a weird experience, and what could it be?" and be open about it, there's still that it might be a different dominant narrative now. Science is much stronger now, or that sort of rational. It must be something in the real. That's obviously always been an issue for everybody for hundreds of years.
That's interesting because it is like that. I mean, it's gone back to his day. It's been like that. Although he was trying to record some of these stories as well and doing all that, it's and you get people doing that these days and whatever. But there's so many people who are still reluctant to come forward and tell their story. and we every type of phenomena.
Very convenient then that they had fairies in those days, and you could just blame it all on the fairies, couldn't you?
Aye, that was it. Aye, fairies, and now it's UFOs and aliens.
Yeah, and the Bible was a little bit a bit more amenable as a dominant narrative actually, because in the Bible, in the Bible, there are miracles, there are demons, there are all sorts of things that happen that would appear to be miraculous, and you could say, "Oh, God made that happen." Science doesn't really give us that way out, does it?
No, that's the thing. But I mean, there's a lot of belief that there's lots of things living around about us that we can't see. We can only see a certain wavelength, and people believe that things exist in different vibrations and things like that as well. So they could just be interacting. And one of the good analogies I had somebody on recently, and they gave a good analogy to it, which it kind of got me thinking. So obviously, we deal with all this kind of stuff. You think about paranormal things, and you think of ghosts, or you think of otherworldly things that can be there, that don't interact with you, or sometimes interact with you. But the way he said it, he said these things we can only see obviously so much or interact with so much. These things are there. He said, but it's no different to if you're outside and there's a bumblebee going about its business, or there's like ants doing what they do. They're not interested in what you do because they're just doing their thing. And it might not be an intelligence thing. It just might be down to they either don't see you or down to that. So I found it just quite a good analogy, just with the thing we think about insects and birds and stuff like that. Not really interested in what we're doing, but they're there. And it could be the same kind of thing. But the way he said that, I'm sure he said to start off, it was like the thing came in. It was either like the thing appeared. You could see it coming in far off when the bird was chasing it. And it was either looked like it was shocked it was getting chased and it could be seen. And then it just about hit the car. But you could see it in its face. I mean, so I found that it's just quite a kind of wee mad interesting story there. But I mean, you'd be surprised the amount of people who don't want to talk about stuff. I mean, I was quite reluctant for you to talk. I've not got a lot of mega great stories out there, but I was always kind of reluctant to talk about stuff as well, because you didn't want people at work thinking you're nuts or anything like that or whatever. I mean, so
you put yourself in that nice sort of zone where Robert Kirk put himself as well, which is, I'm just the mediator. I'm just telling you what other people think.
Well, I have told some stories though. I have got some stories. I've told some things, so there's been a few interesting ones there. But so what have you kind of found out yourself? I mean, with some more of your kind of research and things about Robert Kirk in regards to premonitions or precognition.
Premonitions. Now that you've said all that, I'm thinking we should probably have done seers, because there's a lot to say about what he says about why people can see things and other people can't see things, and where they are, and whether they're born with it, and whether it's a bad thing or a good thing. There's an awful lot. That's an entire YouTube video on its own, I've got to say. There's quite a lot in there. But yeah, premonitions I thought would be a nice one to focus on, seeing as we're coming to the end of the year. Mm-hmm. And lots of people look to their horoscopes and tarot card readers online and all that kind of stuff to see what's going to happen in the next year, don't they?
Yeah.
So it's topical. So I went through the text again, and there's actually 9 instances throughout the full text of some form of premonitions. Now, the text is actually broken into 3 parts, depending which version you pick up. There's Robert Kirk, well, 4 parts actually. There's Robert Kirk writes his initial secret Commonwealth. Mm-hmm. Then there's a letter from Tarbot, Lord Tarbot, that somehow or other makes it to him as well, although it's addressed to Robert Boyle in London. Mm-hmm. And then Robert Kirk responds to what's in that letter. And then there's another bit that's only in some texts, actually, or some editions of this. There's spells and charms as well, but there's no premonitions in that. That's much more to do with simple charms being recorded, actually. So across Robert Kirk's first text, where he was collecting things he'd heard, stories like you do, and then across Tarbot's letter, there are 9 different premonitions. And I thought it was really interesting, personally, just looking at what they were about was a bit of a sign of the times, because we would look at our horoscopes and most people would be looking for career, money, love, maybe.
Yeah.
And actually, there's one about love and there's one about money, none about career. And all six of the others, sorry, seven, the other seven are all about war, injury, and death, which I think just shows what dangerous times they were.
Yeah.
Civil war, effectively, back in those days.
No, totally. Take your pick. I mean,
yeah, it's really complicated. That's a whole other YouTube video as well, or a whole series of them actually, about those times. So we are talking about 1690, early 1690s, late 1680s, I suppose, and it's William of Orange, but all the knock-on effects that really, really badly. It's supposed to be the Glorious Revolution and no one died, but actually hundreds of people died in Ireland, and Scotland was pretty badly affected as well, and it kicked off wars for several decades after that. So it really was quite tumultuous times, and it's still the times where people got hung for things, and witches and all that kind of stuff going on. So put a foot wrong or upset the wrong person, and who knows. So I just thought that was interesting. I didn't know if you wanted to do love, money, or some form of war/death first.
See, it's interesting though, you separating the seers from the premonitions, because but the seers don't have the premonitions, or would the seers see something? Would they be more inclined to see things differently? So I'd probably put them all into one category, because like seers, you get let's say you get seers these days, they can do a lot of different things. I mean, you maybe chalk it up to they could be somebody who could potentially see the future, or actually see things that maybe travel elsewhere within, you know what I mean? So they could maybe see some distance, a seer as maybe see something at a certain distance, or they could maybe go into the future or go into the past. So you get, for example, at this day and age, you get like remote viewers. I've got somebody on next week who's a remote viewer, and that was like studied in the American government back in the day. They had a psychic spying program and stuff, and then they found that they could go into the future and into the past, as well as seeing things as well. So that's interesting. So sorry, we'll go on about that. So
I mean, all of these people are described as seers by Robert Kirk, so they've all got made a premonition, and they're a seer, and he does go into who might be a seer, who might and all of that. But like I say, that's probably a different topic. Just going through what premonitions there were. Interestingly, he says that most premonitions are within a 2-month period, or just a couple of months. So people see something and then it happens fairly quickly. Although there are some examples that are definitely not that. So he makes these assumptions, and then he tells us a story that totally undermines what he's just said. But here we go. So shall I just pick one to go with?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Okay, let's start with the money one. I like this one. So he says that in the place he used to live, which I assume must be Balquhidder.
Yeah.
Do you know where that is?
Yeah, no, Balquhidder. Yeah. It's on the road up to it's up past. Is it Crane Larrick up that neck of the woods?
Yeah, up that way. Yeah. Towards that. It's very beautiful. There's very little there. Tiny little hamlet village, really. And it probably was the same then. But he says that these two women both had visions independently. He goes on, and it's clear that they must have been in bed, in separate beds, in separate houses, and then they heard, as they woke up, they had this vision that there was gold somewhere in a fairy hill. And as they woke up and came to, they heard a voice that told them where it was. And both of them set out from their houses at seemingly the same time, the same night, and met up at the fairy hill. And I think this is wonderful, because actually you would think they'd fight or they'd have an argument. They didn't. They decided to help each other to dig. So they dug together at this particular point, and they unearthed all these golden coins. And I think he said it was in a chest, but it's obviously in some sort of thing. So they unearthed all these coins. And at the time, there was a bit of a shortage of grain. It was, people were hungry. And it just goes to show how hungry they were, because the women then decided to halve the gold coins. Again, very diplomatically done. They halved the gold coins, took took their half back home, and they swapped a dish of gold coins for a dish of corn or grain back from villages and stuff around them. And he says 15, 20 years later, he's writing, because he does tell us what year that was. 1676 that supposedly happened. He says, oh, there's still people with these coins to this day who traded their grain for these coins.
Be good to get one of these coins. Get my hands on one of these coins.
I know, we're worth a fortune now.
Yeah, totally.
Especially because it was definitely from that particular incident. Yeah. Yeah. So I thought that was nice. They worked together. That was a nice one. And then the other nice one, I suppose, is the love one. There was a young lady, and that he was. Now this is actually Lord Talbot, so he's in a company of various people, but one of them is a young lady who's unmarried, and they come across this man who's a seer, and they say, "Oh, is anyone in love with this young?" Presumably like a test. Is anyone in love with this young lady? And this seer goes on to describe that. He says, I can see someone right next to her. In fact, he's got his head on her shoulder, which means that they're going to get married. And then he describes the man to a T, and lo and behold, so it comes true. A few years later, she marries a man who looks just like that. Now that sounds like a bit of a horoscope one. Which came first? Was it that she was looking for that man, or was he right? I don't know.
I find it interesting though, where they've got seers back in the past, and people go to them and they'll ask them questions, or they'll pay them money to ask questions and things like that. And you get that right for the ages with shamans and all that kind of stuff as well. But it's interesting, you get that to this day where you get mediums and stuff, and people go to mediums and they'll ask them questions and they'll go through all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's interesting how how these people weren't burnt at the stake back then. They all weren't burnt at the stake back then. And it was accepted. No, and
it's been riskier as that time went on, because it was James I and VI back in sort of 1601, 1605, whatever. He was the one that wrote demonology and sort of, made it a bad thing, as it were. Yeah. He kickstarts all of that. So it's interesting that, the end of that century, and you've still got people quite willingly, saying that or the middle of that century, towards the end, quite happily, saying that they're seers and they can do these things. You would think you'd be terrified. So one of the other examples is of a lady who is sort of set up as an oracle. So here's somebody who's definitely in that, this is my profession zone.
You're claiming to be an oracle, you're definitely in the profession.
Definitely in the profession, yes. It's not just a random person who sees something, or somebody who's passing person that says they can see things. And she was the oracle of, he says Collis Snatch, but actually I looked that up and it is Collinsey. So she's way out, yeah. And she'd been asked, is the enemy coming anytime soon? What's going to happen? They were expecting something. And so way before the enemy arrived, I think it was a week or two before, she did see something, and she said, oh, they are coming. And I think they're coming. She said, I don't know if they're coming or going. She said, it's very strange. There's a boat out there. I can't decide if it's coming or going. The men are sort of backwards. I don't know. They're not rowing right. There's something wrong with this vision. I can't work it out, but they are coming, or they're nearby. And it turned out when they did turn up that actually the enemy had stolen the boat from the island in the first place. So that confused her, because it was actually their boat. And they were although the boat was heading towards the island, they were rowing backwards. So that had confused her, because she couldn't tell if they were coming or going. And I think that caused some embarrassment for the poor oracle.
No, I find that interesting. It really is. I mean, it's especially as well. I've been listening to some of the stuff in regards to remote viewing, and it's just amazing that now actually they made a thing out with the whole psychic spying it and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's and people, quite a lot of people believe that everybody's got it in them to do it, and it's just trying to develop it or to get it out there.
Yes, finding your third eye. I've heard of that.
Totally, aye. I mean, everybody can do it apparently. I mean, that's it. So
if they get into it, or their third eye. Yeah. Here's an interesting one that's not one of the nine. It's not actually prediction. I didn't have it in the prediction category, but I had it in a sort of, well, I don't know where else it goes category. There was a seer in a pub who, so, you know, clearly you can't tell whether these people are actually sitting in a pub going, "Hey, I'm a seer, do you taking money for it," or whether they just happen to be known as the seer of the pub. But the seer in a pub, and he was having a conversation, and he suddenly turned strangely and looked at thin air. And they all said, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" And he said, "Oh, my mate, he was trying to shove a load of butter in my face, a plate of butter in my face."
Mm-hmm.
But they were like, "There's no one there." And he's like, "Yeah, but he's in Ireland, and we just play these games," sort of thing. So the men that were in the pub, they took down all the date, the time, and everything, and they wrote to Ireland and got a response agreeing that yes, actually, that man had been paying that trick exactly that time.
So for some reason, these two people could manage to communicate with each other.
Yes, one in Scotland, one in Ireland.
Mm-hmm.
So that sounds more like what you're saying about that. It's not so much predictions; it's about that idea of communicating without
or being there or going there. Yeah.
So yeah, I thought that some of these stories are quite funny, aren't they? I mean, they kind of like they also get a bit of fun with it.
It's funny. Imagine I'm going around collecting these stories. And how would you find out about these stories? Oh well, Margaret for the next town over heard this story in a pub where, and then go and try to track these. It's hard enough trying to track these stories during this day and age with the social media and internet, let alone like when you've even got like a solid good mail service back then. Like a letter would probably take weeks to get somewhere.
Yeah, and then clearly people were a little bit happier to talk about it perhaps than they are today. I don't know. Okay, I think we're coming into a time where people are more happy to talk about these things. Certainly much more interest in this sort of stuff today, isn't there, than there was, say, 10, 20 years ago. I think the internet and the pandemic, people want a certain level of they're open to thinking in different ways. The pandemic's shaken us into actually the way we were living isn't the only way to live, and then maybe reality is not quite the only way to see the world either. So I think people are opening up to that sort of idea, which might spark a bit of a revolution, like scientifically, and we break a boundary somewhere. That'd be interesting.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting though. I mean, that's the thing. That's when I was referring back to this again, but like in the American government, they've done it in a lot of different, like the Russians did it as well, probably did it in the UK, but like they'd funded it for like 30, 40 years or something. And it was like...
The Russians did they?
No, I mean the US.
US.
It was funded by like no funded, but I mean the government funded it, but it was like the military. And it was things like the CIA, FBI, DIA. They all used it. They used it for loads of different things. So they would use it for things where so people would... It was set in a way where they would have a monitor and somebody else would give them a double-blind target. And the target could just be a set of... It could just be a set of coordinates. And it was mainly... and the person giving it to them didn't know what it was, and they didn't know... It was in a blank envelope, they didn't know what was inside it. So they would basically... I'll know more about it next. I know what I've read about it, you know what I mean, and what I've looked online through years and that, yeah. But so what they would do is they'd basically go into... I wouldn't say a sort of trance type thing, but they could just go there and be there and describe the target and draw it and stuff like that. And some of them had like about an 80% success rate. Some had maybe about a 60% success rate. But they could basically, like for the DIA, for example, maybe like the drugs enforcement, they'd tell them where drugs were on boats and they would search the boats and find them. Or they would maybe be able to find where there's maybe missiles getting kept in Russia and things like that. But they funded it for years. I mean, they proved it actually worked. It started off in the Stanford Research Institute at one of the universities, and then after that it went into the government. You know what I mean? But there was loads of stuff on it. You know what I mean, it's quite interesting. All that side of it, because it gives it a bit of credence because they actually funded it for that long, and there was like lots of different people involved in it and doing it. But you've got that aspect to it. But the other thing that interests me as well was where you've got linked to the same type of thing, you've got the Monroe Institute. So the Monroe Institute is based in the UK and it's based in America. It started in America years and years ago with a guy called Robert Monroe, and he was like a media exec, but he ended up having out of body experiences and not know what's happened to him. So when he looked into it more and more, eventually could do it lots and lots and lots and lots, and he ended up trained a lot of people how to do it. So like he could do it, like leave his body, and he was like transversing within this local, we used to call it, or he could go elsewhere after that, like different dimensions and stuff like that. But he was linked into a lot of the people as well who were to do with like the governmental stuff and that as well. It's totally interesting when you actually go down that rabbit hole. I mean, there's quite a lot to it, but it all links into it.
You need to contact the game show people, and because if such a thing exists, surely they've got a blacklist of people that are not allowed on the game shows because they'll win all the money.
Well, I bought a lottery ticket tonight, so I'm hoping.
I think it was that one that Meghan Markle was on with the boxes. I mean, if you could see inside the boxes, you're going to
win. That's it. Aye. No, it's interesting. It's just in my head because I've been reading about it and been looking at it for the last wee while, for the last few months. And I've got a guy on next week, so it links into a bit about this because it's still in the past. So obviously, I'll let you kind of crack on with some of the other ones.
Yes, I mean that's not quite premonition. It's kind of like being able to. It's more like a psychicness, but it's in this real time. It's whereas these are all the ones I've picked out are all to do with. There probably are quite a few examples of that as well, but the ones I've picked out mostly are premonitions. So somebody seeing in the future. So where shall I start? So there's some fairly simple ones, like there's from Robert Kirk. Let's go. Robert Kirk. There's a man who is covered in blood, just appears by the side of this man. Man walking along the road, and there's a man comes along and he's covered in blood. He's not actually real, and he says it's just to warn him that the enemy are coming and they're about to, something's going to happen. And that's the vision he has. And he thinks, well, it can't be. We're miles from anywhere where anything would be happening. There's no way in the world. But actually, lo and behold, suddenly the enemy jump out. There's a nice, simple one. Where given a little bit of a warning. And the other one in Robert Kirk's one is, is one of the ones, it tickles me as well. So in the pub in Killin, not a bit further north from Balquhidder, but same sort of a general area, isn't it? There's a man walks in. This is quite funny. I thought a man walks into the pub. There's already some men in the pub, and the seer of the pub, which is getting the gist that there is a seer in every pub in the Highlands. He gets up and he walks straight out the door, and people stop him and say, "Why are you walking out?" And he says, "Oh, that man that's just walked in, he's going to die in 2 days." And the man's like, "What? I'm going to die in 2 days? I don't think so. Who do you think you are?" So they have a brawl. The man who walked in kills the seer and then gets executed for it 2 days later.
Oh, right. Okay. That's a good one.
And they're all the ones from Robert Kirk's. Tarbott's letter actually is much more structured around this event, this event, this event, this event, where Robert Kirk sort of goes around the houses trying to work out who can see and why can you see. So some of the examples are sort of more spread out. So Tarbott has more examples of things actually. So I've got them in a list here. So he's and Tarbott's, because he's a lord, he's travelled around a lot, and he's sort of got a group of people, servants and whatever, that go with him, and he'll stay overnight at houses of people, friendly people that he knows. So he goes to stay overnight one night. Stops at a house, and they're going to stay overnight. And his servant, and he has a seer as a servant, of course. Every brigand, every pub. His servant says, "Oh no, we can't go in there. We can't stay." And he says, "Why can't we stay here? We've been miles from anywhere." And he says, "No, I've just had a vision of a coffin is going to come out of that building and then tomorrow, And Tarbott's like, "Oh, I haven't got anywhere to go. I'm making little bits up here. I'm making it a bit more real, but a bit far from anywhere. It's late at night. Come on, we're not doing this." And he's like, "Right, is anybody about to drop dead?" "No, we're all in good health. We're going to stay. That's it." and it's the owner of the house that drops dead.
Ah, right, okay.
And he's taken out. It's an apocalyptic fit, which is actually a stroke.
Hmm.
So yeah, because he calls him the landlord, which is interesting because it's a house and then it's the landlord, but maybe they're all pubs when they want to be.
Just frequenting pubs and finding seers.
To be
Sounds like
fair,
it sounds like quite a good job, actually.
yeah, they were your job roles you could have in the Highlands clearly back in the day.
That's maybe the idea. That's where I'm going wrong. I mean, try to get the stories. People don't want to tell the stories, so go to a pub, but they're half drunk, and they'll tell the story.
Or sit down and say, "Yeah, I'm the seer of the pub, and I'm just going to be resident here forevermore." I suppose the word people were resident in coffee houses in London at the time. They'd set up business there and saved on your electricity bill in today's money. But yeah, instead of having to pay for an office or anything like that, they just go and sit in a coffee house and they'd have a regular table and that would be their office.
Yeah.
So maybe the same happened out in the Highlands with the seers.
A few coffees at Costa. That's it. See, do you think that they tried to figure out why people did see?
Yeah,
Did you think that?
Yeah.
Did they think? Did you think what did they come up with? Did they think it was hereditary or?
The short version of it is because he seems to meander back and forward. Actually, he's got lots of different examples, and he says that he kind of makes a bit of a list about it, and he says he thinks that more men are seers than women. That might be because they're in the pub more. I don't know. Yeah. He doesn't say that.
Yeah.
He says that he thinks some people are born with it, and some people it just comes on them, and he doesn't know why, and they don't know why.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's because they've. He says it is possible to have an unction which will allow you to see. And there's also a really strange thing that if there's trying to get this right, I haven't actually looked at this bit for a while. So if you are with a seer and you want to see what the seer is seeing, you have to put your hand on his shoulder, I think, and your foot on his foot. There's some sort of thing, and then you can see what the seer sees, but only temporarily while you're in that position.
Yeah.
So there are various different ways that you can become a seer or see what the seer is seeing.
It's interesting, like wee things like that. I wonder how that was passed on. Like how they actually understood that, and then it was passed on through maybe families or seers, and then it was passed on to Kirk and things like that. With that type of story where you need to do this and this and that works. Because there's interesting stories these days, and the same kind of thing where, as you know, you'll get people who are born with it, or you will get people who just comes on them. And there's some kind of stories that go about these days where they might have they'll be right through their life fine, not had any interaction with anything, and then they maybe have a UFO counter or something like that, and then it starts to develop something from there. Or they will maybe have I don't know, maybe a high, something in their life has caused like a high amount of stress. And then after that, it triggers it. Or it triggers something within them. I mean, but it still happens to this day, and it's interesting that it's no different from what was going on then. You think now that things are ramping up or there's more people these days, it's just no, it's always been there.
I think the internet gives us the illusion there's more of everything these days.
Yeah, totally. Aye.
It's so easy to find whatever you're looking for, and there's so many examples of everything.
No, definitely. Yeah. But it's just interesting that it was happening then, and people were tapping into it.
Yeah, I always wonder whether it's how much of it is true. How much is that they want attention, or that's their only way of doing things. There's all those other ways that psychological reasons why people might set themselves up and say they can do that. But I always wonder with the thing about if a seer can see things and you put your hand on their shoulder and all that, surely that had to be tested out and someone had to agree that was the case.
Yeah, that's it. Aye. Going then, right, okay. Oh.
You'd think like the whole pub would come and I want to go.
Like a bit the conga.
Yeah, so I do wonder about these situations. I think there could be some really funny versions of that. Horrible history style, I think, but we could play with. So okay, there's another 3 examples. In Ullabill, it says. Now I think that is not. I was thinking that was Ullapool, but actually it's on the edge of Loch Broom. I did look it up.
All right, okay.
And this is again, Lord Tarbert was passing Loch Broom, went to Ullapool, and he passed on the road a servant seer. He sounds like more of a farm worker type servant. He was staring strangely, and had stopped. He dropped his spade, and stopped working, and he was working on a field. And so he said, "Oh, what can you see? Because you're just staring into space." And this seer said, "I can see." Well, the way I've remembered it is that the English army coming, but I think he described it as horses and red coats or something.
Mm-hmm.
So coming when the barley was ready to harvest, and it wasn't sown yet. That was him digging the field. Mm-hmm. So when this crop is ready, the English will come. And how did he know that? Who knows? But apparently that did actually happen. It says, so it was. Mm-hmm. This happened. And I think there's an element of people wanting control over. I mean, if you've got very little communication, very slow communication with neighboring villages and towns and things, and you're constantly in fear of the army turning up, you would want that control, wouldn't you? So maybe he's just the one that hit on the right time. I don't know. Maybe they were all, they're coming next week. No, they're coming tomorrow. No, they're coming next year. And maybe he just hit on the right time. Who knows? But apparently, so it was. And then another point in his travels, when he was up in Ross in 1652, he was at the home of Alex Monroe. And I think this is another one where he stays overnight. And he gets there and he sits in a chair around the fire. And there's some other people there as well, staying overnight, islanders. And one of the islanders says, "Oh, I didn't sit in that chair." And why not? What's wrong with the chair? He says, "Well, the chair right next to you got a dead body in it." It's like, "No, it hasn't. It's empty. Nobody there at all. It's empty." And so the islander says, no. There's a guy there, and he's got his leg over one arm of the chair, and he's slouched in this particular position, and whatever, and describes this man to a T, dead man. He's like, "Oh, okay." And then the next thing that happens is that someone comes to the door, and it's one man carrying another man who's not very well, and he's been hurt. Mm-hmm. So they say, "Oh, put him in that chair." So he sits in that particular chair in that very pose, but he doesn't die. So it's not quite a premonition. Mm-hmm. Nearly dies though.
Was it the same guy?
Well, it was
supposed to be the same guy.
It's supposed to be the same guy, yeah. And it all happened within the same evening. Mm-hmm. So he nearly died, but he did actually live.
So Tarbert must have just been traveling around asking for these stories.
Yeah.
As well, right? What he's got.
He might have been, or it might just have been that Tarbert travelled a lot anyway.
Yeah.
And he just came across a lot of things. And then when he was asked, I think because of, Robert Boyle being, big in the Royal Society, I think he just had a bit of an interest at some point. So Robert Kirk was doing some stuff, and he asked Lord Tarbert, "Well, what do you know about this?" Simply because it was genuinely an interest. Is Scotland full of seers? Does everybody know everything in Scotland about what's going to happen next? And so Lord Tarbert had written him a letter that gave him all the encounters or the examples he could think of. Yeah.
That's mad. That's quite mad. Like.
Tarbert's an interesting character. Tarbert does have a great interest in witches as well, but he hunted the witch hunters, so he's a rationalist of sorts. He would see through the stories about this person's a witch, and he'd say, "Actually, no, that's not the case." So I quite like Tarbert for that.
Usually just trying to get rid of somebody for the village.
That's exactly what they were doing, yeah. Or that's his case. Or sometimes they get money for it, I think. And Tarbert, he was there was a few years where he was in charge of the courts, and he noticed this pattern. So he was like, "Hang on a minute," and went after the witch hunters. We don't often hear about people who did that in those days.
No, we don't. I mean, that's it. I mean, the thing as well with Kirk, do you think Kirk had we're reading between the lines, do you think Kirk had experiences in regards to himself, apart from obviously, the kind of folkloric experience you hear, what happened to him at the end and stuff, but I mean, apart from that, do you think that maybe he was a seer, or maybe he had some experiences that he didn't relate to, or he just had an interest in it?
Really hard to tell. you're right that what happens to him in the end, the legend of that has overshadowed everything, and everyone, there's a sort of general understanding, and the way he's described is that he must have come across fairies, and that's where his interest came from, and that's why he disappeared with fairies. Well, I'm pretty skeptical about that, to be fair. And I also think there's another little bit that goes in there that's to do with him being a seventh son, and therefore, as a seventh son, he was naturally a seer, which is part of fairy folklore. But actually, I can't find any evidence of anyone else who was ever a brother of his. I've come across a couple of Kirks around about the same sort of time, but they're not related. I've checked, so I'm not sure about that. And in terms of what he writes, I also haven't come across anything that suggests I think he definitely believes it, or he had any experience beforehand. So his first text, the Commonwealth, the straightforward essay he writes at the beginning, you definitely get the impression he's writing as an academic. He doesn't believe in it. However, he may be masking it. He may be thinking, oh, that's not good, it's embarrassing. I'm not going to let on that I know about it. I'm just going to write about it, as if put himself in that space. As he then responds to Tarbot's letter, it becomes a little bit more confusing, because he starts relating to, but this happened in the Bible. Oh, but that happened in the Bible. Oh, but this happened in such and such. And he's referring to ancient texts and things. And you can see him sort of almost working himself into, maybe it's true. And that almost makes me think that he never did have any experiences prior to writing the Commonwealth, because otherwise he would have been a little bit more confident when he got to that, rather than going, just the way he comes at it. I kind of think he didn't, but it was very difficult if everybody around you sort of believed in it, wouldn't it?
Yeah, but even at that though, or if they didn't believe in it and they seen it as, if people didn't believe in it and they seen it, there's like maybe like people it didn't, as in the notoriety or whatever else. So maybe him looking at the Bible stories and so on as maybe actually putting out a justification that some that it does link in where, and it's trying to convert people in a underhand kind of fashion. You know what I mean? If you know what I mean, no underhand, but looking at it in a sense where, well, this could potentially happen because it happened here, or they relayed this here, or this story was there. I know that, but
he does come around to the idea that there's more in heaven and earth than we can perceive, and here he is writing this thing. He never says that they don't exist. He just writes about it third person academically. And then when Tarbot also puts his name in the hat, he's like, well, actually, maybe because, God's done these miracles and these things have happened in the past, and we believe that, then why can't we believe this? But he doesn't relay any instance in which he's seen something, which is the important bit, I think.
Is his grave empty?
Ooh, good question.
The question I got asked recently, and I couldn't remember if it wasn't. Sorry, on you go.
Yeah, so the legend kind of records that it's full of rocks, that his bones are not there. Other people say that an image of him was found, like a waxen image that would be left behind by fairies. If they took the soul, they didn't necessarily take the body, or they left a familiar type fake body behind that looked the same. So some people think that was buried. There are also some theories around, and they seem to hold up actually. The stone on the top, because it's a flat grave, the stone on the top is actually dated quite far, decades later.
Yeah, did somebody else reinstate a grave for him? Was it not like Walter Scott or something like that, or was it no like Scott or something, or something before that?
Got quite a bit to answer for, I think, because he's the one that links together Robert Kirk being disappeared by fairies and writing about fairies. And before that, nobody sort of links those two things in text. Whether they did verbally or not, it's impossible to tell. But Walter Scott, being a great storyteller, of course he's going to link those two things, and he's good. And he's the first person that says he was stolen because he wrote about fairies and he gave away their secrets. So actually, in accounts from before then, that link isn't made. So that's quite interesting. Trying to get to the bottom of what really went on is become a bit of I'm down some sort of rabbit hole doing that right now.
Yeah. Try to find out actually what happened. Aye.
What actually happened to Robert Kirk? I think that's of great interest.
Mm.
So I've got one more premonition for you, and this again is from Tarbert, and he said that all through this, there's this man that from a particular village, and all through his life, seers had constantly been saying to him, "You've got an arrow through your thigh." He's like, "Well, I haven't." He's like, "Yeah, but one day you will." So his whole life, he's waiting to have this arrow shot through his thigh. And everybody else is like, "When's this arrow going to shoot through your thigh?" No, do you know it's not happened yet? What's happening? There's not even enemies around. Who's going to shoot you with an arrow through the thigh? And then he dies. And everyone goes, "Well, that was a lot of rubbish, wasn't it? All these seers, all of them, they all thought he's going to get an arrow through the thigh." So they go and they go to the church to bury him, give him his funeral. And as they rock up to the church, there's another funeral party rock up to the church at the same time, and they have a bit of a fight over who's going in first with their corpse. And in the course of this fight, an arrow is shot and it goes straight through the dead man's thigh.
That bad a fight at a funeral. That's although you still get fights at funerals, mind you, in Scotland, but it's like people drinking too much and stuff. But that's quite mad, actually. Fighting with maybe like a crossbow or a bow or something like that. Somebody get an arrow through the leg. A dead man get an arrow through the leg.
The waste of an arrow through the dead man's leg. Yeah, there you go. It came true. It did come true at the very end. So they're all the premonitions that are in the text and the larger text. But like I say, none of them are what's going to happen next year and who's going to be king. That would have been a useful thing for someone to have predicted, but
no, I find the whole thing interesting, just that what they were looking into and following the stories up and trying to gather them and things like that as well. I mean, it is what I did find interesting before when I was speaking to you is like the kind of I'd call them portal stories. You know what I mean, with people disappearing and or reappearing. I found them quite interesting. There's certain places that people disappearing and stuff. You still get things like that going on. I mean, so it's quite
that makes you wonder, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how are you getting on with the book?
Well, yeah, I've written quite a bit this year. I think these things take longer. Some things I've written in the past just happened sort of by accident, and you're like, oh, that's been published before you know it. So, and then other things take months and months, and to be fair, in the past, things that I've had illustrators for, that's taken longer. Whereas this one doesn't need an illustrator, so I thought it'd be quite fast. And actually, no, it's not, because there are so many different accounts of Robert Kirk. Even, I'm only really looking at the ones that are predate the internet, because the internet is full of things that refer to them. So I'm like, right, I'm just going to stick to them. But even going through them, try to write myself an essay just to keep me straight on them and what they say, and because they don't agree on anything. They don't agree on dates. They don't agree on how many wives he had. They don't agree on how his family lost their money when he was a child. They don't agree on anything. They don't even agree on how many children he had. So trying to work my way through all of that, I've ended up with a sort of 10,000 word essay going on that with a big grid. And imagine it becoming a complete nutcase down a lane,
Not at all.
And then been through all the different texts as well, and explored it myself and found out a few extra things that are not in there actually. So it certainly is worth the stuff I've got there. There's only the odd little bit, but there is stuff that I've noticed that I'm fairly confident about that other people haven't noticed, in terms of just the text itself, and then working through his life. Because I'm trying to write a sort of linear, and this happened next, and this happened next, like a story.
Yeah.
And yet I know that anyone reading it will go, but that book said this, and but that book said that, or but what about this source? And I'm like, at what point do I stop writing footnotes that explain why I don't think that was a reliable source?
Yeah. Too much.
So, like I say,
there's been too many cooks in the past.
Yeah, quite possibly. So yeah, I'm just down a bit of a rabbit hole with it at the moment, and most of it's there as a sort of first draft, I suppose, but it's just what to keep in and what not to keep in, and what makes it hang together and still make it a readable thing.
I think it's interesting as well as like some of the other stories where you maybe have people having experiences, like some of the ones that was relayed before, and let's say even just disappearing to somebody else coming back, or the ones with the lady who would disappear and came back, and for it was a good number, it was a good bit of time disappeared for, and things like that. So it's almost like you have experiencers back then who were kind of dealing with something else, and then it's still kind of going to this day because you get people who are coming forward with say they're having experiences and things, and it seems like the same thing. Jack Valet, he would basically say it's like it's a different mask. You know what I mean? Whatever it is, it's just masking as something else. Or some people just believe it's always the same thing, or maybe it's just been the same thing, but as a case of it's masking for maybe which could potentially have been acceptable at a certain time frame. But it's interesting.
It's just we just don't know, so you've got to try and work out why that happened. And some people will say it's aliens, some people will say it's second sight, some people whatever it is. I think I had better sort of rational explanations for the examples in the last video than I have for this. It's just what is this? The science of premonitions. It's someone makes a lucky guess and they get it right and get a name for themselves, or do they actually see something?
It's funny though. Like I'll give you one in my own, right? So it's like you probably everybody has deja vu, and you probably, and the only thing the difference between deja vu and a premonition, well, I would think anyway, is because you have deja vu, you can't remember when you've thought of it before, right? So you have deja vu where I remember this, I've been here before, and you just get that instantaneous kind of glimpse of that, and you could maybe just see a few seconds ahead, just at that moment, or you just kind of have the same kind of feeling you've been there before, but you think you've been there before. But you get sometimes where, which I've had in the past, where there was one story I could always, there were a few, but I could always remember, and it happened. I was on a bus, and I was travelling down to Cornwall, and leaving up here, and I'd worked with a contractor up here, and I was going down there to stay for like a couple of years or something, and I can remember nodding off in the bus, and I can remember nodding off in the bus and working with this chap at the back of the house, and I could remember like what everything looked like. I could remember that what the scaffold looked like, what we were doing, where we were working, the house type, and what he was saying, just in a kind of small instance, maybe just like maybe a fleeting minute going through it all right. And it was like one of these sleeps you get when you're just nodding off, but you're no sleeping, you're no awake. And it was like that one when you're just, and it was that instant. It was kind of like maybe just nodded off for like a few minutes. And I had this, and I could remember it, and it didn't just disappear from my mind. I could remember thinking, no, that'll not happen, because I'm going down here to stay for like a couple of years. My mum moved down south, and I kind of thought I'm going down there. I'll probably not see him again. I'll not be working up here again and all that kind of stuff. And I went down there and I stayed, and my mother died after a year, and I came back up the home. I came back up to Scotland again, and within like half a year or a year's time, I was back working with this guy again, and I was at this building, and it was like I never remembered that actual bit. I could remember when I remembered it at the time, and it wasn't until it happened again I thought, I know when I've remembered that, and it was that everything was the same, everything was the exact same. And I could remember the back of the house. I remember what he said, and it just when he said that, it clicked for whatever he said at the time. It totally clicked, and I could remember everything. But it was the thing with me was I could remember when I remembered that, no just like deja vu, because deja vu might just be these wee instances, wee glimpses, maybe the future or whatever else. But you've not remembered when you've remembered it, or when you've dreamt it, or whatever else. And so that was there's a few other ones that happened to myself, I mean, but that was a kind of interesting one, because it did happen, and I could remember when I thought of it, and it was like about a year and a half prior. There's another one as well.
Science would take you down the route of the time-space continuum and whether or not there are wormholes in that, whether or not, is time and space a static thing that we travel through rather than something that's ongoing. And I'm not a scientist, I don't know about these things, but I think a lot of the stuff that comes across to us as the unknown at the moment, probably it must have some sort of rational explanation. It's just that we haven't yet understood what it is, and that would be the same for the case for Robert Kirk. I mean, some of the instances he describes, you can now sort of pinpoint, oh well, actually there is a condition. It's quite rare, but every now and then there's a woman who after birth does such and such. And he describes exactly that, but they didn't know about the condition then, and it would have been so rural, and they would probably not have come across another one, example of that. It wouldn't have been known by medicine at the time. So of course they put it down to fairies, or they put it down to some sort of supernatural thing, but it is actually a medical condition, we know now. So maybe we're just at that stage where there's another leap to be made, and we'll find out why these things happen to us. And maybe your memory, it's almost like a memory that you had on your travels of a future event, isn't it?
Well, people think that, well, some people think anyway, that times all times are happening at the same time.
Yeah.
Like linear, and it's like, well, no linear, but like at the same kind of time out the way, rather than like in a cycle. But that's kind of one aspect of looking at it. But I think if you look at quantum physics, I think they can explain it. I've still to read that book. Still to read that book. But I had another one where it was just a dream. It was a strange dream, and it was before COVID, and there was people in white hazmat suits, and they were dragging people away and stuff, right? And this is well before COVID, and it was. I could remember I was walking. Sorry, say that again.
It's just the image we saw from China right at the beginning when nobody believed it.
Aye, I mean, but see, it was actually it was well before COVID. I had it maybe a year or 2 years before it, and there was people with white hazmat suits walking down the street, and I was walking down the street with nothing on, or no hazmat, and they were just oblivious to me. But they were like grabbing other people in that, and they were like pulling them away and doing loads of stuff. And and I could remember the dream because it was really, really vivid. Because there's like some dreams I have where they will be extremely vivid, and other ones you'll just forget them. You know what I mean? But this one was really vivid. It's one of the ones that kind of stuck like you were there. And it wasn't until I was watching the news, and it was like they were dragging people at houses and that. I was like, that was what that was. So it was like, I don't know, you could just have a dream and then just chalk it up to that and tie in that later on. But it was off. It was
that might well end up being explained through psychology rather than through quantum physics. That might be the way. I mean, Carl Jung describes something very similar. I take it you're probably familiar with Carl Jung. And you just tap into a consciousness that sort of a bigger community, and you might tap into that through dreams, obviously, but also through creativity. So you might create a picture.
Yeah.
So that's come from somewhere. So maybe there's something in that. Maybe we'll
totally. I mean, absolutely. It was weird though, because it was a bit prior, but it was one of the ones that stuck in my head, and it wasn't, the penny never dropped until you could also just rationalise it and say, back it, you just had a dream about people in white suits and that, and then that's happened like a year later or whatever. But it was quite interesting. It didn't happen too long after it. But like the main one that actually sticks in my head, which has never ever happened, which is it was so vivid where there was this was a dream obviously, but there was like I was doing it at the beach, and there was something wrong with the water where it was like churning. It wasn't like a tsunami or nothing like that, but it was like churning. The water was like just really, really violently moving, getting back and forth and everywhere. And I was on a cliff looking down at it, and it started to get dark. So I started walking back to the car, and before I got back to the car, it was getting light again, and the sun was setting. So it was almost like, and so coming away from the dream, and I still remembered it, so it was really, really so vivid. It was like And I'm not saying this is a premonition or nothing, it was a dream. So it's a dream, but it was just so vivid, it was a crazy dream. And I'm hoping it doesn't happen. So the sun was setting and rising, and it was setting and rising really, really quickly. So it was almost like the way I think this something was going on where the earth was actually spinning faster. So the sun was rising and setting like quicker for some reason.
I was going to say, maybe you're a seer, Chris. And now I'm thinking, I really hope you're not.
I hope I'm not.
That doesn't sound like a good scenario at
I don't know
all.
I don't know what was going on there, but it was almost like the sun was setting and rising faster. But that was only a dream. It wasn't a premonition. And the only really premonition I said I've actually had was the definitely one I can remember was in a dream where I was working at the back of somebody's house, and that was it. Or apart from deja vu.
That's the thing, not to know whether or not these things are going to come true.
I know.
Yeah, it's nothing very stable about any of it, or very dependable. We could do that.
That's the thing is though, when you're talking about the seers with Kirk, and when you get the seers who are adamant about the arrow in the guy's leg, it's almost like you can't change it. It's almost like you can't get away from the fact that this is going to happen.
Yeah. A lot of this is another one. It's not actually an example. It's not an example as such or a story, but he does say in his text something about quite a lot of seers describe or when somebody's ill or going to die, and I think it's more if you're not if you're going to get killed, it's not going to be a sudden thing. But if maybe if you have cancer or something, you know, that sort of thing where you've got a terminal illness, and certainly in those days, and the seer will see, and a lot of seers had obviously said this, that they see a shroud and it starts off just at the feet. And so when they look at the person, they can see it, no one else can see it. And then gradually, as this illness gets worse, and the person can be completely unaware, this shroud goes further and further up the body. And then at a certain point, you know, they die.
It's mad.
So that's quite an interesting one.
That is, that's interesting. No, I went up and visit. I did go up and visit the grave and stuff, Robert Kirk's grave, and it's just covered in money.
Yeah, that's a recent phenomenon, you know.
Yeah, is it?
Yeah, it didn't used to be when I was a child. There's quite a lot of different things that have happened over the years, and it's just how society responds to it, I suppose. But the money is fairly recent. In fact, that I would say that's in the last 20 years or something. And did you go up the Fairy Hill and see the tree?
I did, yeah, dig up the tree. Yeah.
With the lots of ribbons and stuff.
Loads of ribbons, pictures, gifts, lot of gifting, things like that. Yeah, all that kind of
that started when I was probably a teenager. When nobody had done that before. And then there's a Dunan's camp, which was clearly sort of prefab war buildings of some sort. I think it was something to do with bringing children out of Glasgow and housing them outside of Glasgow because of the war.
Yeah.
Originally, but then it became it's still owned by the council or whatever. It became a holiday camp for years and years for, again, children from usually schools, I think. Maybe
I've been there. I went there as a kid. I did go there.
Right. There must have been some teacher there who come up with this brilliant lesson plan to get kids to go out and experience, you know, come on out into the countryside, guys, and we're going to have a walk up a hill. And obviously told them the story of Robert Kirk and come up with this lesson plan that and before we go, we'll write on a ribbon a wish. So I remember the first few years that it was there, and I grew up just at the bottom of that hill, actually, one of the last houses that you're walking up to. And I used to go up there all the time. And some of the ribbons had really, it was really interesting to read them all, because there'll be some that look, I'd really like to have a TV in my room, and then there'll be others like, oh, my baby cousin's dying, and somebody, you know, fairies, can you please help? So some of them were really tragic, and others were just really mercenary.
Yeah.
But yeah, that only started, I would say, maybe 25 years ago. It's not actually that old. It's not like it's been, because you hear about these fairy trees around Ireland and stuff, and because it's linked to folklore and legend, you think they've been doing that for hundreds of years, but maybe they haven't. It's been interesting to be part of a village and watch that grow.
Yeah.
The other thing that was interesting was that they built a new tourist information centre at some point. It had been in this tiny little village, tiny building, and really just a desk. What do you want to know? And then they built a proper purpose-built building that's still there now. And someone, I don't know who it was, as an artist, was commissioned to do a sculpture. It was in a glass box, and it had to be a moving sculpture. Presumably, you pressed a button and it did stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, like them animatronic things. It's really good. Yeah. And it was. I don't know who did it, but it was Robert Kirk's head, or the top half of his head, sort of as the fairy hill, and then you could see underneath. So there was a sort of shelf, and underneath there was the rest of his head, and then there was all these there were stilettos, shoes that went round and round, and I remember as a teenager thinking, stilettos got to do with Robert Kirk.
Did you ever find out why? No.
No, I've never found out why, and I still don't know why. And I assume it's just an artist's interpretation of fairies, but I'm not sure that they did wear stilettos, not on the hill.
Wonder, is the school camp still there?
I believe. Well, I mean, the buildings are still there, and I think for a while it wasn't a camp, but I'm sure somebody said recently that there was kids up there again for something. So yeah, it was a teacher from there, that allegedly anyway, that started the whole craze of putting ribbons and stuff up there. But it divides the village, divides the village, that does. So some people in the village think it's wonderful, and it brings in tourists, and you can imagine if you in a cafe, it's a great thing.
Yeah.
Other people in the village are really against it, and they're like, oh, we don't want all the rubbish up there. Somebody has to clear it every year. There's no money for that, so it must be volunteers. And they don't like it because it's a sort of not very ecologically sound, and there's lots of rubbish.
Can't take away the gifting. No, it's like you were struck down.
I was quite like that. I thought it was quite nice because they're making more of it, and I think probably the village doesn't really cash in, as it were, on this fantastic legend that's on their doorstep, really. And most of the villagers, most of the tourists that go there, they're going there for the woods and cycling, and you see car parks full of caravans with bikes on the back, and everyone wants to do all the hill climbing, and then that's great.
Yeah.
I was like, I completely missed a trick. They should actually have streams of people coming just to see where Robert Kirk's grave is. But they did eventually put up some little signs about it.
Yeah, yeah.
I say eventually. I obviously I'm just of an age where no one made anything of it when I was a kid, and then some point there was some sort of regeneration, and there's a couple of little signs now, and the Forestry Commission did some bits with the trail up the hill and things. So it has gradually grown, but I think it would be a huge hit for Aberfoyle if it suddenly was mobbed. It's only a small village place.
Yeah, totally. It is.
Yeah.
It is. I mean, I took the dog up there not long ago, and I walk up to the grave and then went around the forest and stuff, and that, and I can imagine some people for the town getting peed off it and try to bin everything, and then getting struck down by the powers that be.
You do realise that I'll never be able to back up the hill of life, because if I write a book about the fairies, what do you mean next?
That's it.
Even after a YouTube video, I'm not sure. I'm scared.
That's it. You get blamed for it. The what do you call it? The rejuvenation here.
I suppose if the book flunks, then I can fake my own death, and everyone will think I've been stolen by fairies. My backup plan.
I'm sure it won't flunk. You know what I mean? Listen. Well, thanks very much for the stories, and thanks very much for your time. And I'd also like you let me know when your book comes out. And
I will. Yeah.
So have you got anything online or anything like that yet? Or have you got a website or anything like that? No yet.
Yeah, I think I gave you my website address last time. I need to revamp it. So at the moment, it still sort of showcases my children's books. So seeing as I'm moving into an entirely different area, I think I'm going to have to give it a bit of a revamp.
Yeah, right. So we'll put that in the show notes again for anybody who want to see that. And then, thanks very much for your time, and thanks for coming on again.
Thank you for having me. Enjoyed it.
You're welcome.
And your story. It's very
Thanks for
good.
that. It's premonition stories. A few weird ones in there. I mean, that's my own. I mean, so that was. There's been other ones as well. I mean, which were quite odd, like, but in regards to being in a nuclear facility and running downstairs and all that kind of stuff and things like that. But don't
I'm
know.
just
It's
hoping you're
the
not
difference.
actually gifted in that way, because otherwise, no,
The
the
difference
sun,
between
the day in the sun, and the world going around too fast. That's pretty scary. That.
it's pretty odd. Like, I mean, the thing is, it was pretty odd because it was the thing. The difference between these ones in comparison to another dream, it's like they're so vivid. It's really vivid. It's not like a normal dream. It's like you're there, and there is a difference between them. There's only been a few in my lifetime. You know what I mean, and the one with the guys in the white suits was one. They were like they were proper like. It was the funny thing was it was well before COVID, and it was like the proper kind of hazmat suits with the internal air tanks and all that kind of stuff. So it was like you can imagine the suit, but it's not just a hazmat suit. It's like a proper hazmat suit with the air canister inside. So you can imagine like a fireman would wear like an air tank on his back. So it's like a suit that contains all that. So it was just odd. I mean, the penny dropped when I seen them in China, but it might have just been anything else. But there's been a few mad ones. I mean, but that one with the world thing. I mean, it wasn't the world. That's what I chalked it up to being the world because it was the sun
Mm.
setting, the sun setting and rising fast. Oh, I'll tell you another one which I forgot about, and it played into a bit of deja vu. And this did happen, right? So I was at school camp. No, that school camp. But I was at Laganlia school camp, which was it's one of the ski resorts up in the Cairn. It's like one of the kind of ones far east, no far east in the far east, but the far east in the Cairngorm. So it's like you've got what's the name of the hill? The Lecht. So you get the Lecht. You know where that is? So you've got the Cairngorms, like the mountain range with the ski resort. Over for that, like further over the next mountain range, there's one called the Lecht, and you need to kind of drive through to get to it and stuff. And we stayed at some school camp there, and I was in first year, and I could remember the same thing happened when I was younger. So as I was saying, I forgot about this one actually. So the same thing happened. It was like falling asleep, and I had this like short snippet of dream, me talking to somebody, and so what it was is well before CDs, when it was like a tape deck player and stuff like that. I was standing in a place, and it was darkly lit with flashing lights, and I can remember standing, and I had a disc in my hand, like a silver disc in my hand, and I was talking to somebody, and I said, "What is this?" And at the time in my dream, I never knew what it was. Right, I just seen it as a silver disc, and I didn't know what it was at all. Fast forward, like maybe I don't know how long it was. I mean, until that happened probably when I was like in primary school or something. But I could remember it vividly. When I got to this, I was in high school, and I was maybe in like second year or something, and I went to this place, and I could remember CDs and all that were coming out and all that kind of stuff. And I could remember being at the same place and asking the person, "What is this?" And it was the same person, and it was the same thing. I was only asking I was only asking what album it was.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't asking, but in my dream back in the day, I was asking what it was, and I kind of interpreted it as I didn't know what the thing was. But I was actually fast forward a number of years. It was what was the music, and it was like
Chris, I
everything
think
was
you've got a gift.
everything
I
was
don't have the gift, but I think you have.
everything was the same. I mean, everything was the same. It was dark lit because it was like a kind of disco thing we were trying to have as well, and there was flashing lights. So that's what it was. Everything was the exact same. So that one I forgot, but that was an interesting one for back in the day. But aye. Anyway,
You could make your own little book all about all of your different
well,
things
I'm
you've
looking into.
experienced.
I mean, I'm looking into remote viewing. So I've read like Robert. I've got to say Robert Kirk, Robert Monroe's books. This was the guy. He started off in the 50s having out of body experiences, where he would leave his body, and he ended up he done. He kept it to himself for a while. He thought he was dying, and he ended up. He managed to have a process where he could actually do it quite easily, leave his body, right? And then,
On demand.
sorry, say that again.
On demand. like
on
when he
demand.
wanted to.
He could leave his body. So he could put himself in a darkened room and leave his body, and he could go anywhere. So he had like things where it would be a case of, it was like
Great.
on this dimension where we are in this world, they called that like locale 1. And then locale 2 was a place where it was like here, but you could see other people, like people who had died, right? And stuff. So most people who died he explained it as the travel on elsewhere, right? And looking into where they went and all that kind of stuff, there's quite a lot into it, right? But the people who were ghosting, for example, they were just attached too much to materialistic things that were here. No in a greedy sense, but maybe like a house they loved, and then or a person or things like that, and they didn't know to leave. And it was like these people are kind of stuck. And so that was kind of one aspect of the ghost thing. But it went elsewhere, as in like into other type of dimensions, which were all in the same type of place, but on a different vibration, right? None of that's basically you can't bring him back and say, "Oh, I've seen this," and believe me, right? Because you could just interpret it as it's just in his mind. But he did do a lot of scientific tests where he could basically they were in one room, he would leave that room, go to another room, and tell them what was happening in another room, or who was in another room, or what they were doing. So he could do all that kind of stuff. And they tested it numerous times. So it ended up, he started this thing called the Monroe Institute. And it's been going on since like the 60s or something. He started that in the 50s. I think the Monroe Institute was like in the 60s, 70s. And so he was developing all types of thing to do with psychics and out-of-body experiences and things like that. And he developed this thing called hemisync. So it's to do with basically your left side of your brain and your right side of your brain. And it was to do with hearing different types of tones in your ear that then bring the two together, right? So so you ends up it's easier for you to do this in regards to like astral travel or out of body experiences, or it's easier to meditate and stuff like that, right? So you found out that you could actually get people at that kind of stage of meditation a lot quicker by using this hemisync device and doing that. And it researched it for years and stuff like that and done it. And there's loads and loads of stuff in it. And even the people who done the whole kind of...
There might be something in that. And I'm saying that because in education and childcare, there is, and I couldn't tell you who, but there's definitely a theory out there that learning to play an instrument actually has this healing quality, and the reason it has it is because it links your left and right brain. It uses both sides of your brain. That sounds like a sort of similar thing.
Well, he had a thing where they would do that and it would make it easier for you to like out of body experience or get in a more meditative state. There's different ways of working with the hemisync stuff. But he developed this whole he was in contact with other things, right, elsewhere. And he was basically trying to help to awaken people, right? So that's what the whole kind of thing was to try and do. Everybody had this on them to try and bring it forward and try and do this. So he started the Monroe Institute, and it was a non-profit kind of thing. And it ended up like people would go and do courses and learn stuff and do all that. And he was involved in doing stuff with some of the people who were in the military and all that as well. So these people could leave their bodies and go and see things and do all that. I mean, and it's odd into all this kind of sci stuff. And he developed it, and it still goes to this day. He's dead now, but his books are amazing. But he's got three books, and one's called Journeys Out of the Body, Far Journeys, and then there's another one. I can't remember the other one, but there's three books, and they're amazing. And but they're still running to this day. There's one in the UK, and there's one in the US. And as I'm saying, it's totally interesting. So I've just actually been through reading. I'd actually read stuff on astral travel going back when I was 18, and then and read a few books then, and then I read loads more recently, and then I've just linked in with this. I've got a guy on next week who's a remote viewer. They actually get paid. They get like some of them like have got their own businesses, and they get paid by companies to look at the stock exchange or to find things.
What is the definition of a remote viewer? Why is that different from a seer or a...
Because it's, well, they see it as, I think this, it's been described and they see it more as a brain process rather than, it's like they try and keep it away from the woo if you know what I mean. So it's like the woo being a bit airy-fairy, right? So they try and keep it away from that. So it was like a military designed thing where you could do this and anybody can learn it. To this guy, I was listening to a podcast, this guy, Joe McMonagle, he was like the #1 person who'd done it in America, where he was the first candidate and the government had done it. And they'd done it for years and they trained loads of other people and stuff like that. And there was this thing in Japan where they were trying to find lost mummies, these emperors and all that kind of stuff. And they ended up, he went and he found them and all that. Found them in this obscure island. And it's amazing, some of the stuff. I mean, but it's totally provable. The thing, it was a factual thing. There was loads of different programs in America and the government. One was called the Stargate program. Another one was called, what was it? I can't remember the name of them all, but they ran for years anyway. And there's a film on, it was a more kind of tongue-in-cheek comedy film called Men Who Stare at Goats. And it was George Clooney was in it. Yeah, George Clooney was in it.
Yeah.
It was based on a true story. You know what I mean? So, but it was more kind of, that was more tongue-in-cheek, a bit of kind of stroke comedy about it, but that actually happened, and that was kind of like what the film was about. You know what I mean? So, interesting though.
What do you think about all, the big ones? What do you think about like Nostradamus and Baba Vanga, I think her name is, isn't she? The ones that predict big
I've
stuff.
never looked into Baba Vanga or anything like that. Nostradamus, I mean, they've got, all his stuff is written in code. So it's I don't know how people can totally just decipher it and come out with and say, oh, it means this. I mean, a lot of that stuff like seems to be just pulled out of a hat, I think. You know what I mean? It's like, although you could maybe interpret it, some things. I can mind looking at Nostradamus years ago and I'm relaying stuff about Hister and things like that, and they relayed that it must be Hitler.
There was quite a good quatrain about that, wasn't there? But maybe it's one of those things. He wrote so many quatrains that over such a long period of time, you could always find something that would work.
Aye, that's it. I mean, that is it.
Darren Brown would say that's what that was.
See, Darren Brown looked at remote view and he kind of poo-pooed it, saying the guy they had said it was the same kind of thing. He said he put that many different things in there that he could just pick what one he wanted to do. But the thing where they done it in, what the guy was saying when they done it in like America with the government, and they started it because the Russians were doing it. So the Russians were doing it. They had like some like kind of like people doing psychic stuff and all that kind of stuff, and protection and trying to have seers looking at stuff and secrets and all that. And even like Hitler and that did it as well in the Second World War. They used to have dowsers try to find like submarines and stuff. So
I think most of the royal family, in the past, they always had someone, didn't they? I mean, Russia was famous for having
Rasputin and stuff like that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So they had all that kind of stuff. So the Americans, they looked into it, and they could see this one guy who was really, really good at it. And then they had more people training people and stuff like that. And they had this program where it basically worked. And totally interesting. But you can still learn it to this day. And as I'm saying, people learn it and they use it for a number of different things. You know what I mean? It's like some people just work for companies and they'll find certain things for them or things like that.
I mean, some things have got to be based on this is the most probable outcome, or this, they've got inside information, or they can see patterns and how things happen. And I try and, as everybody else does, tries to make predictions about who's going to be next prime minister or who's going to win this or that kind of stuff. And I'm invariably wrong because I've clearly got no talent whatsoever for that sort of thing. In fact,
they would do stuff like
there's got to be the asparagus lady. I like her because she's just so blatantly like, I just pick up asparagus and it tells me what's going to happen in the world next year.
These guys would basically go. They could go and like biolocate into another facility somewhere and like read name tags and files and stuff like that. I mean, they could do all that type of stuff, and they would draw maps of the areas and they'd show what thing was in them, and they could show it to a T. And there was other ones where there was ones as well where they kept getting these locations, and it was like a strange one where they would get this location, it was on Mars, and they didn't get told it was Mars, but they seen there was like a massive pyramid on Mars, right? And this is one of the interesting ones. I've seen this like massive pyramid, and it was almost like someone was trying to communicate with them, and they gave it to. Like that was a total blind target. They didn't know. He just relayed that, and they thought this must be a new find, thinking it was on the Earth. because it's a lot bigger than the one at Giza, right? And they gave it to a few other remote viewers as well, and they seen the same thing. They all seen the same thing, and the target was something like, it was something crazy like Mars, and it was like X amount of like tens or hundreds of thousands of years BC in Mars at a certain point, a certain kind of like geographical point. But the thing is, they said that it didn't really matter about the actual location, because like what they would do is they put right coordinates down and they could just go to that coordinate. But it didn't actually matter what the location was. It was just mainly that they could be able to find what they were looking for. So if they wanted them to go somewhere, they could actually just go, but they couldn't have the person in the room knowing what it was. So it had to be double blind. They wouldn't know what it was, and the person wouldn't know what it was. It had to be somebody else would give it to the person, no telling them what it was, and then they would basically be prompting them stuff, right? What can you see? What can you feel? What can you smell? And all that type of stuff. It's totally interesting.
If anybody wants to find it, I mean, are these written up as sort of experiments? Is that what you're saying?
I mean, I'll tell you what. I mean, there's a thing on YouTube called. I'll send you the link for it. It's free on YouTube. It's a video. It's a film free on YouTube. It's a documentary, and it's called. What's it called again? I think it's called. What is it called again? Psychic Spies or something like that. But it's a documentary, and it's got like the guys who were involved in some of the projects and all that kind of stuff, and they were like physicists and stuff like that. You know what I mean? And they ended up developed it and done it, and they could do it. And I'll send you the link for it. It's quite interesting, like. But it's what to do with like what happened in America and the Russians and stuff, and about how long it went for and all that kind of stuff, and how they developed it. It's interesting now because there's loads of stuff going on now, as I said to you before, in the American government with the disclosure process, because now they've done things in the government where they're trying to. Some people want to try and get the whole UFO kind of aspect thing out, right? And there's factions that didn't, but they've done things now where they've done things through Congress. They've already had hearings about it. They're going to have more hearings about it, and they've put things into legislation where whistleblowers can come out and basically go against their non-disclosure agreements and stuff like that. But they know so much. I mean, we didn't know anything compared to what like they know today. But I know I'm rambling and sound like a nutcase, but
the more you know, the less you know, isn't it?
It is actually all happening. I mean, and that's the thing. It's like you go in this rabbit hole where it's like totally consuming, because it's not just conspiracies anymore. It's actually like it's actually going on. I mean,
that's the rabbit hole you're down, and I'm down a rabbit hole of historical documents. We've just joined up rabbit holes there for a...
Totally, aye, that's it. I'm going to delve into the remote viewing one soon as well, so I'll see how that goes.
Yeah, and we'll have to do ghosts in Robert Kirk one day as well.
Aye, definitely.
He calls them whites, actually. WIGHT.
Whites.
Whites. That's what he calls them. Maybe because they're white. I don't know.
Aye.
Just like today with a sheet over them. I don't know.
Well, I mean, dig some stuff out and we'll do another one at some point. Aye, definitely.
All right, then.
Right, listen, thanks for your time, and I'll catch up with you soon. I'll give you a wee prompt when this is coming out. All right.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
See you soon. Cheers. See you.